The Cincinnati Bengals are still going to the Super Bowl. Joe Goodberry is going to talk with us about it.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm Jake Liscow. He's James Rapien. Today we're joined by Super Bowl at Joe Goodberry on Twitter, our guest again today, as he has been throughout this playoff run. And when we started covering this playoff run, we talked to Joe, and Joe said, I'll join the show as long as they keep winning. And last week we said, hope to talk to you again next Monday. Week before that, hope to talk to you again next Monday. And here we are talking to Joe next Monday because the Bengals continue to win. Joe, how's it going?
It's going as good as it could possibly go. I mean, to think that the Bengals would be here, to imagine they would be here, even the most diehard Bengals fan, biggest optimist, didn't picture this. Not realistically. I mean, there are people that are cashing their bets right now, which is pretty awesome to see. But I know, can you even imagine the payout on that stuff? It's crazy. But yeah, I'm doing great, and it's good to see you guys, having such success with the Bengals this week.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Hopefully I get to see your face again maybe next week, and then 2 Mondays from now. Not this coming Monday, but the next Monday, because then that means, well, you know what that means. Anyways, Joe, what went through your mind? I'm going to get right to it. It's 21-3. The Bengals are on the ropes at Arrowhead. It feels like everything's crumbling. The national media is saying that they don't belong there and that they're in over their skis and that they were a luck-out team that shouldn't have beat the Titans. And you know all those narratives. What was going through your mind at that point?
That is a great moment to reflect on, I think, because this Bengals team has started slow in a lot of games. Remember, we talked about this halfway through the year to the three-quarter part of the season of how can this team start getting quicker out of the gates and score some points and not be so far down and have to climb back, because they won a lot of games that way. But this is the Chiefs, and you're the underdog, 7-point underdog, and you're down big. And I remember tweeting at the time, if the Bengals don't score a touchdown here, it could be over. The replies were overwhelmingly, it is over, or it's going to be over, or it was over 2 drives ago. And it's funny, like, we haven't learned 5 other times this year, right, that this team is just not out of it. And that's what I was trying to hold on to, because I think old me would have definitely said, yeah, it's over right now, guys. I mean, this is the Chiefs. They're going to score 35 and if not more. And so the part where I said it could be over was because this team has clawed back so many times. And the Bengals did go down and score, obviously. And then they get the stop there right before halftime. And we know the rest of the story. It was an amazing comeback. But at that point, I was nervous. I wasn't completely jumping over the bridge, but I was keeping an eye on it.
I got some flack for saying this, but yesterday when we were talking about it in the post game, James said, I never felt like this team was out of it. And the Bengals did just enough for me to never feel like they were out of it. But like you, it was very much on that brink where if they don't get one of those stops in or out of the half, or they don't get a steal a possession with BJ Hill, or they don't score when they score, they were very much on the ropes. And I think that's what you said, James. I think you used those exact words. The Bengals were on the ropes, but they bounced back, and that's what's different about this team. They have shown all year, the slow starts, but they've also made those second half adjustments, right? And that's what it was specifically, I would say, on the defensive side of the ball. I don't know actually if the offense adjusted as much in retrospect as I would have liked to have seen, but Joe Burrow doesn't flinch, so that's okay. We'll talk about Joe Burrow and what the offense did, but how about that defense, man? You come out letting Patrick Mahomes play a perfect first half, last drive notwithstanding, essentially a perfect first half, essentially 4 touchdown drives. They didn't finish one, and he made a huge mistake in not getting points there, and you can blame Andy Reid, but Patrick Mahomes took the blame, said he should have turfed the ball at the very worst, and he didn't. So then after halftime, you're thinking, man, how can the Bengals defense steal a possession here, how can they start to get some stops? What was going through your mind at that point? You said you had a moment where you were thinking, what can the Bengals defense do, and how did that align with what they actually did?
Yeah, it was actually right when the Chiefs get the ball with a minute and some change going to drive down before the half ended. And they hit that big play to Tyreek Hill and go out of bounds. And I'm just like, they cannot continue to sit and just play zone. I mean, they're just getting chewed apart here. The pass rush is non-existent. They have to change something up. Something has to happen. And then people are asking me, what are they doing? And I'm like, really? They're just playing zone, sitting back and hoping to get Mahomes to run one way and commit one way, and they would all kind of flood that way, and it just wasn't working. And at that point, people are like, well, what should they do? And I don't normally think that way in terms of schematically, okay, what would you do? But in that situation where it's do or die, where your season is on the line, actually I had fun thinking of, all right, what can they do pieces wise? Can they match up man to man? Can they blitz? You don't want to blitz Mahomes, right? We know this. Can they play with a single high safety? You don't want to do that because the Chiefs have killed that defense whenever teams finally break down and go back to it. So right at the end there, at the goal line, the Bengals actually do go man coverage. And that's how Tyreek Hill gets stopped at right at the goal line, because Eli Apple is screaming through traffic behind all the defenders and cuts in, hits him at the right time and stops him. And it's because he's in man coverage finally. And maybe they could do that because it's goal line. You're not worried about getting beat over your head. But I think that propelled them into the halftime and coming out, whereas Bengals said, okay, we can't just straight rush 4. We're going to have to disguise it a little bit more. And I think they took Sam Hubbard being the key here and to let him spy a little bit more. And we see that pay dividends on the last defensive play in regulation. But they started doing this and saying, all right, for Hubbard, you are going to kind of contain Mahomes. We want to keep him in the pocket. And if he tries to step up, you're going to fill. If he tries to go left or right and commit, you're going to run with it. And so that from the front already did a lot to help the pass rush actually get home, or at least make Mahomes feel like the internal clock almost sped up on him. I felt like more than a few times and threw it earlier than he had to. The BJ Hill play was one of them. But on the back half, what the Bengals started to do there is started to play a little more man coverage, started to bracket and bump. Kelsey started to bracket a little bit with Tyreek Hill, sometimes with the safety on that side directly getting involved, and sometimes it was the opposite side safety coming down for any crosser or slant or any post like that, just to really get Mahomes' eyes off of him. And now it seemed like that's when I felt like his clock was like, okay, Kelsey's not there. Oh, they're bracketing Hill. I need to make a play. I need to make something happen. And that was all they needed. It was such a big difference because I think guys were open too. There were some passes where the ball is just tipping off their hands or just a little bit off. And Mahomes isn't that kind of guy where if he gets off his mark, that really affects him. That's never been a thing that's really hurt him. So to see it just miss, I started to think like, man, what are they doing that's just enough to really have an impact on Mahomes?
There are a couple theories here. Sorry, James. There are a couple theories here that I really like. One of them is going back to the college tape and the way that teams defend like Mike Leach offenses and those air raid, passing nonstop kind of stuff and taking cues from that. I wonder if Lou Anarumo did that because apparently Patrick Mahomes struggled against that some in college. The other thing here, Will Brinson and Ted and Wynn right now as we're recording are having this conversation. Maybe Lou Anarumo held some of those adjustments until halftime so that
I know.
Andy Reid couldn't counter adjust at their halftime. I just thought that those are two little interesting theories to throw out into the world.
Yeah, I actually made that same point yesterday that maybe the Bengals were okay. If we can survive the first half, we'll make these adjustments at halftime or roll them out afterwards. So that because there is talk about Andy Reid and his opening script and then how he adjusts right after that, and then there's not the adjustments typically later in the game as it goes. You pretty much know what concepts they're trying to really hammer home that week. So if you can wait it out. And man, you got to have some balls to do that. No, I don't know if that's even allowed. You've got to be strong in your convictions to be able to do that.
We'll continue our conversation with Joe Goodberry next, but I have to tell you about betonline.net because, well, the big game is less than 2 weeks away. And yeah, the Bengals aren't favored, but they've been pretty good in the underdog role this postseason. So if you want to wager on the Bengals, you can do it at BetOnline or maybe you just want to get in on some prop bets. Maybe you think Joe Burrow is going to win Super Bowl MVP. Matt Stafford is the favorite, by the way. You can do that and so much more at Bet Online, the number one spot for all things NFL betting in 2022. And by the way, it's not just football. They got basketball, hockey, boxing, UFC, odds coverage, the best in the business at betonline.net. So make sure you go there now. Betonline.net, your number one online wagering destination. BetOnline, where the game starts. Joe, real quick, I want to ask you, when did you allow yourself to think that they could win the game? Jake mentioned when they got to 21-21, they're going into the fourth quarter and you're 15 minutes away, but they're down 18. You don't count them out. When did you allow yourself to say, oh my goodness, they might actually do this?
I probably didn't at any point until the Bengals had the ball in overtime, to be honest with you, because if you've watched enough Chiefs games, they are just so explosive that at any point they could break it. I mean, it doesn't take much. We watched them take the lead back against the Bills twice with like 2 minutes remaining in the game, and then with 13 seconds, and then in overtime. I mean, it just sometimes it clicks for them because they're that explosive and that good. But the Bengals just kept getting stops somehow. And then even when the Chiefs are driving down the field at the very end there, I almost thought, let them score, get the ball back to your offensive, to get to Joe Burrow, and because that's your best chance of winning this game. And somehow they just got stops there. The flushing them out and getting Mahomes to step out of bounds, dive out of bounds. Great plays by Hendrickson. Great plays by Hubbard. Hubbard to spy. I think that play is getting attention, but not enough. That final sack, forced fumble, that almost ended it right then and there. For him to spy and pull it out again, they need Hubbard to be that wild card for them in that front seven, which he's done a bunch this year and in the playoffs. I mean, all of these guys on the defensive side have made plays throughout this 3-game stretch here. It's amazing. I'm going to make a highlight video because it's just so important to me to how well each guy has made their plays. But Hubbard there all right, he goes left, goes right. Okay, Kelsey's now gone. And now as I'm thinking like Mahomes, all right, left and right, he's not getting out of the pocket. He's going to step up now. You see that moment for Hubbard where he just puts that foot in the ground and goes straight at him and kind of, buckles down as he's getting closer and closer, and Mahomes has nowhere to go but try and turn around and spin away. And it's just like, wow, they actually have the answer, whatever it was at that moment. I didn't know without really seeing the film. But at that point, that's when I was like, okay, they've got a chance to do this.
Mahomes looked hesitant with whatever he was seeing, the first read or even the second read. As you mentioned, you bump Kelsey, which I think maybe you undersell there a little bit, Joe, how disruptive that was to his game. Bump and then bracket at times Kelsey really limited his impact and his ability to get into his route and into the passing plays, and just the way that they paid extra attention with that single high safety. They dropped 8, but they were still playing single high, and they were dropping the other safety down to Rob. Or actually, it wasn't always dropping the safety down. Sometimes it was a corner. Sometimes it was a linebacker. They were getting creative
Flowers,
with who they were putting in that hole. Yeah, Trey Flowers did a really nice job, I think, as well. I mean, they had a play where against 11 personnel, they had 7 defensive backs on the field. And they got Mahomes to run around with it, and eventually it's not a sack, but it's not a complete pass either. Nate Tice over on the Athletic Football Show, I think, did a great job highlighting Logan Wilson on those last 2 plays when they dropped 8 as well, getting into the passing lane, causing a little bit of hesitation from Patrick Mahomes, including the play where I think it's Byron Pringle who's like jumping up and down in the end zone after he doesn't get the ball, thinking he's open. And Logan Wilson is just like kind of perfectly splits the difference between Kelsey and Pringle on that play to make Mahomes hesitate just long enough to come off it. And Mahomes missed like 3 guys on that play because his what he was expecting to see versus what he got was so different. And it's so hard to confuse Patrick Mahomes that way. But he does also have this in his history. You go back to college, the Brett Favre reputation. You go back to the people that say he's really lucky and he gets away with a lot of balls that should be picked. And so, the reputation is there. And, even the last pick of the game that Jesse Bates makes a great play on, really nicely passed off from Mike Hilton to the safeties, really perfectly played bracket, perfectly played by Jesse Bates, perfectly played on the tip drill by Von Bell, right? And it's just this defense as a team that's come together with, I've called him on Twitter, mad scientist Lou Anarumo, man. Last week, putting 1,000 pounds of defensive tackles between the tackles to stop Derrick Henry. This week, going with 7 defensive backs, 3 defensive linemen, 1 linebacker against Patrick Mahomes. The versatility, variability, multiple nature of this Bengals defense really showing up.
You know, the thing that I really loved about it, and you guys will do more film stuff with Mike tomorrow. But you know, you've got a lot of listeners now, maybe some more casual listeners that don't know. But a lot of today's NFL offense versus defense is how many safeties are you keeping in the middle of the field? Is it 2 or is it 1? Is it middle of the field open, which means 2 deep safeties, or is it middle of the field closed, which means you have a single free safety in the middle of the field, and offenses normally attack the boundary in that scenario. What the Bengals or what teams usually do is they will show you 1 or 2. Let's say it this way. They'll show you 1 look before the snap, switch it after the snap, so that the quarterback thinks he's getting one thing. They've switched it. Now I've got to adjust and go to the opposite, whatever you're giving me. What the Bengals did on a few plays that I thought was really awesome, and I want to highlight it, is normally at the snap, you're going to rotate that. All right. So you're showing one thing, the ball snapped as the quarterback's dropping back. You're going to bring that 1 safety down into a robber look. Now you got 1 safety deep. What the Bengals were doing was holding it almost 2 counts, 1.5 counts, and then bringing that robber down, which I think was just enough to give Mahomes a little bit of hesitation of, like, instead of right at the snap, you're bringing that other safety directly down into a spot, because they really weren't worried about it. It's like, okay, are they going to run deeper routes and try and beat us deep? No, they're not. Bring your guy down now. And so, like, that little bit of just reading it and reacting, and you got to have some veteran safeties to do this. And the Bengals love their safeties. They're 2 good players that they can really count on and interchange like this. That little bit of hesitancy that I'm seeing that most teams don't do or don't trust their safeties to be able to hold was the biggest difference, I think, in this game plan.
Yeah, I like the nickname, by the way, the mad scientist, Lou Anarumo. I just quick story because it's fun to share these like little tidbits of things. I saw Lou the night before the game, fist bumped him, and I was like, "How you feeling?" He was like, "I feel good," and I was like, "No, how you feeling about tomorrow?" He was like, "Oh, I feel really good," and he smiled. So, hey, I wasn't gonna like say that ahead of the game because, especially when it's 21-3, but I'll say it now, and I don't think he would mind. But that's got to be the biggest shock. Is that fair? The biggest shock this year. It's not that Joe's good. Joe Burrow's good. Joe Goodberry's good too, I guess. But Joe Burrow's really good, or Jamar Chase. Lou Anarumo's seat was hotter than Zac Taylor's. In this defense now, they're so multiple, and they form, and they have these guys like, Trey Flowers is suddenly making big plays. Ask people in Seattle if they thought he was going to make big plays when the Bengals claimed him, right? And Eli Apple, the whole city of New Orleans hates Eli Apple still, and yet he's still tweeting at Tyreek Hill and McCole Hartman after the game. I mean, it's not like it's all like top picks, that are fresh out. It's not like the first pick Burrow, the 5th pick Chase. It's guys that were kind of off the scrap heap, and he's making them and putting them in position to have success.
You're right. A lot of credit for Lou Anarumo. And you know what? As a whole, I think even still, the defense is being underrated, and Lou Anarumo is being underrated. And, you'll hear if you watch any national stuff, because everyone's excited right now. So I want to see what the takes are throughout the football world. And a lot of it is, Burrow, his attitude and how he encapsulates or everything about this team, and how the franchise just absorbed it, which is all the things we said we hoped would happen. And so fair to give credit there. But I think when you look at it more broadly than that and say they brought in a lot of stone cold killers that just don't care about the moment at all. And Jamar Chase and Evan McPherson, right? Those guys get talked about. But then I also think like Trey Hendrickson blacks out at times and just starts taking over moments. And I go, he looks up and he looks at the camera sometimes, and they catch him, and I'm like, he looks like a psycho right now. I think he's completely lost his mind. And then Jesse Bates making plays. Jesse Bates didn't get the contract extension, had an up and down year, right? He has been amazing in the playoffs. Crunch time performers. We've seen this team make other teams make the playoffs and just falter in these big moments and under the bright lights. And it was really what they were known for from 2011 to 2015. It is the exact opposite. They're all making plays. They all feel slighted in some way, especially the guys on defense, the guys you mentioned, right? DJ Reader was slighted about the way they talked about this finesse team going into that Titans game. I think Sam Hubbard takes offense to some of when we say, because I think we all feel it some way halfway in how many games this year. They don't have the pass rush to get to this team. It's all Trey Hendrickson. And then somehow Hubbard ends up with 1.5 sacks, 2 sacks, a clutch play. That has happened so many times this year. These guys, for whatever reason, yes, it's Burrow and that personality, but I think they've brought in a lot of captains from college or from other teams and a lot of just killers that just are mad at the world and want to prove everyone wrong.
On defense, veterans, guys from winning teams, winning programs, and captains. Like you said, big point of emphasis there. We haven't talked about Joe Burrow hardly at all. And we're 20 minutes into this episode. Maybe we should finish there. We'll talk Joe Burrow in this offense in this clutch game, as this team has a clutch gene, coming up next.
But first, I have to tell you about our friends at Rock Auto, because there's nothing worse than having unreliable transportation. I have reliable transportation. I'm blessed. And that's why I was able to drive to Kansas City, and instead of waiting for multiple layovers, I just decided to drive. And well, rockauto.com is the place I use to make sure I stay on the road, reliable transportation, even in the cold, even in the snow. It doesn't matter, because rockauto.com has my back. So not only do they have every part you can imagine for your car, but you're going to save money, 30, 50, even 100% less than some of these other places that are selling parts for your car. And it doesn't matter what you drive. Everyone knows it. I drive a Daewoo. You can easily find parts for your Daewoo, your Chevy Corvette, your Honda Civic, Joe Goodberry's Volkswagen GTI in one spot, rockauto.com. So go there now, rockauto.com. See all the parts available for your car or truck. And be sure to write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box so they know we sent you? Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com.
Like riding a bike, Rock Auto. Like riding a bike for Joe Burrow, too, in the big moments, man. The guy never falters. He wasn't perfect on Sunday against the Chiefs. He threw a pick, could have thrown another pick that would have been very unfortunate, but Nick Bolton dropped it on the sideline.
Oh, what a bad throw that was. Go ahead. Oh.
But despite those issues, they made the plays when they needed to. There's a couple things that I want to talk about on the offensive side of the ball. Well, 3 really that we should probably get to. And James, if you have more, absolutely feel free to chip in. Joe, you too, if you guys have more topics that I'm not about to rattle off. But 1, under center game. The under center play action game, the under center run game, especially on first down in this game. It's just one of those things where I should learn my lesson and not say if they do it again next week, it might bite them, because I didn't think that there were a lot of things that were repeatable out of that Chiefs win in week 17 that the Bengals then went out and repeated in the conference championship game. But some of that stuff is concerning for me. The other thing is of course, pass protection. And now I'm not remembering the third thing. Maybe it's clutch plays. Maybe
all of that build up. Yeah. Okay.
I think it's clutch plays, because all this stuff doesn't end up mattering. Joe Burrow ends up breaking 3 sacks and hitting T. Higgins when he needs to. Having 2 number 1 receivers, by the way. Joe, I saw you compiled T. Higgins 16 game stats.
17.
I think this year, 17 game stats, really impressive counting stats for T. Higgins. But those are the big topics for me when I look back at this offense. And I'm saying throw the under center stuff out and go shotgun. Reinstall shotgun. Go back to last year if you need to. And I hate to say it, but the under center game, I mean, do we go back to that if we're Zac Taylor next week after seeing what it did this week?
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because we've talked about play action as a whole this year as just being kind of hit and miss for this team. Play action is kind of a cheat code in today's NFL, and the Bengals haven't been able to master it, or at least get the advantage I feel like other teams get out of it. So that makes it kind of tough to completely abandon it, because you kind of feel like it should be there for them if they can ever get a consistent run game going, or just execute it, a little bit better. Like they had the one play action play to T. Higgins down the left side that ended up, being a pretty big game, maybe their biggest game of the game.
And a brilliant design on that play.
Yeah.
2-man route. They run both Chase and Higgins straight at Tyrann
At the
Mathieu, who's
safety.
their only deep half safety on that play. There's nobody else with him. Tyrann Mathieu can't be right. Go ahead, Jim.
Right. So those are why you want the play action under center stuff, because you're going to get now one-on-one situations. You would hope that in order to create these shot plays. If you watch the Chiefs, like halfway through the game, they were like, okay, the Bengals are running it whenever they're under center. We're going to commit to defending that, which makes sense because it looks very clear when the Bengals are running it. They're either, if they're under center, it's a run or it's a play action. And I think you'll take those bets if you can get to Burrow before you can get the ball off, which defenses seem to be able to 50-50 that and get to him. So, I'm not sure it's as big of an advantage as it should be for the Bengals to be under center running play action. I'm with you, Jake, on that. I think they're a much better shotgun team. I think they've run it really well out of shotgun. I think Mixon's run really well out of shotgun. And we should also say Mixon had some clutch plays as well, especially in that overtime drive. I think he was never even touched on that one that he broke out and, kind of just got up and celebrated. But it is what it is. And yes, I'm with you on those points.
Yeah. I'm trying to think here about, we got to work Burrow in more. Because what are we? We're 26 minutes in now. Not a lot of Burrow, and yeah, he did have some ugly plays. The thing I loved watching about Burrow, and you mentioned it a little bit, Jake, is him in the pocket breaking free. First, it was Chris Jones on what was it, 3rd and 6? He runs for 7 yards. That play was insane, and then he runs for 11 yards 3 plays later, and it extends that drive, and it's the go-ahead field goal at the time, but. That's the Joe Burrow we saw at LSU. And I mentioned this before the game. I went on YouTube and I checked out like sort of the highlights of what happened Bama LSU from 2019, because he used his feet a lot in that game to extend drives and in critical moments and stuff of that game, because it was really competitive, such a fun game to watch. I was like, man, maybe this is that type of game. And they knew it too. Apparently Burrow said, hey, I might have to run for 100 yards. He joked with Zac Taylor, and they're doubling Boyd and doubling Chase. And I just, goes without saying, but it's good to see that he's all the way back that way, where he's making those type of instinctual plays that make him special and that have him in this position.
The 86 passer rating, I think it's only the second time this year where they had a worse passer rating than their opponent and still won the game. So it's a very playoff type performance. Playoffs are weird, man. I look back. What was it? The last week's game, the Rams and Bucks, they showed the NFC Championship game from 2000. I think it was 2001. And Rams, that high scoring, greatest show on turf, beat the Bucks 11-6. Like, that's weird. It just happens that you run into these teams. The game plans are strong. The teams are strong. The coaches are strong. All of these games have been close since the divisional round throughout the playoffs. You just got to find a way to make a play when it counts. To get more specific on Burrow, though, there was that first deep ball, not deep, maybe it was more of a red zone fade or red zone go ball to T. Higgins, where Higgins gets his arm held, almost catches it one-handed. Like, that's a good throw from Burrow. I think he followed it up. Right. I think he followed it up with another good throw to Chase on the right sideline. Chase actually scored. It almost looks exactly the same. He catches like 2 of those that look exactly the same the last time they played the Chiefs. Difference here is he doesn't get that left hand over to get 2 hands on the ball, and it kind of bounces off between Ward and Chase at the same time. I thought both good throws. And then I thought he followed up a couple vertical balls to Higgins that went out of bounds, where I thought Higgins had body position if you give him back shoulder or whatever the case may be. And so it was hit or miss there, where I felt like the Bengals could have been in a much better situation. That's the thing about the Chiefs, too. I mentioned this after the complaining of Chiefs fans after Week 17. They hold all year. That's what they do. They are a very physical man cover in the back half. You can't complain when you get the flags because they don't get called a lot in the playoffs. You're not going to get the penalties. You're not going to get the flags. For the Bengals to survive it the way they did is really impressive, because the game does change like that so much. And I think that's part of it. Like, I started this, talking about the stats and how it's much different. Scoring is different in the playoffs. They don't throw the flags. You can't wait for it. You guys got to go up and make the plays.
Especially this crew. Like, going into the game, it was a talking point. This crew isn't going to throw flags. The Bengals defense, that's part of the adjustment they made. that, you hear Chiefs fans complaining about. But, I think that the refs missed calls in both directions in this game that hurt both teams, that they only threw the flags when they absolutely had to
Yeah.
in this game. And they let these defensive backs get physical. And it was to the Chiefs' advantage, I think, in the first half, to the Bengals' advantage a little bit in the second half. I think that's just smart game management. If they're not going to call it, take that advantage. If you're seeing the other team get away with it, and credit the officials for being somewhat consistent here, or I would say fairly consistent here, even, a good level of consistency. The Bengals taking advantage of that. But the couple things that stand out to me about Burrow's game, one, the play action stuff we talked about. He's just, whether it's him or the way they run play action, because they just pass set on play action. And so I'm not really sure what the point is when most of these defensive linemen and linebackers are reading the linemen anyway. Like, you're turning your back to the line of scrimmage and you're just pass setting anyway. And then you have guys on Burrow as soon as he turns around. 5 of 11 on play action on 12 dropbacks, was pressured on 7 of 12 of those dropbacks. So about 56% of the time. Was sacked once there, threw a pick there. On his non-play action dropbacks, pressured 33% of the time, 10 out of 30 on the non-play action dropbacks. So, that's much more reasonable, about 33%, right? Pressure rate for the game ends up at 40 because they're having issues with play action. So that's my kind of play action issue. But the other thing that really stands out to me is the deep shots were there. That was part of the game plan. They took those shots. They didn't hit them the same way, but it was still part of the game plan. But the way that they've adjusted the offense this week, last week, is the intermediate passing game has just disappeared. This week, 3 of 5 with a drop on intermediate passes for 57 yards. And that's not enough to that part of the field, because Joe Burrow is so good in that part of the field. 18 of his attempts between 0 and 9 yards downfield, 5 of those attempts behind the line of scrimmage. Big screen game, 6 screens for the Bengals in this game. But that's the adjustment. They know they can't block, so Burrow's finding the easiest read, making it easy for himself, and just getting the ball out quick. He's hitting the back foot and throwing.
I think a part of that, not using the middle of the field in the intermediate area this week, we should say C.J. Uzomah obviously got hurt early in this game. He has been a big, in the Raiders and the Titans game, he had nice big plays down the middle of the field, really to keep the defense honest. I think when he went out, Drew Sample comes in, he may be even a better blocker than Uzomah, but you just see him, he's slow off the line. He's not a threat. Also, I think they wanted to put the running backs into the flats more to maybe entice to get, if they're going to play cover 2 and play a zone, to get that boundary corner to come down onto that to that running back, rather than it be versus cover 2. A lot of times it's hit the middle of the field, the seam, or check down to your running back right over the middle. And the Bengals didn't have that. They had instead P. Ryan out on, which he scored on, but into the flats or off to the side rather than over the middle. So that could have been just an adjustment for how they wanted to attack the Chiefs, and then missing Uzomah.
Yeah, and speaking of Uzomah, he suffered a sprained MCL confirmed by Zac Taylor. It doesn't sound like there's any other damage, and that's obviously good news, but who knows? Maybe there's an outside shot that he could suit up against the Rams. But overall, when you have to undergo that MRI, it's good that there isn't any other damage long-term for Uzomah, who's going to be a free agent. So that's worth noting. And I do think he would have had an impact. I think there were times, especially since they were doubling Chase and doubling Boyd, having CJ out there would have made a big difference, and or at least a difference, right? Where he doesn't have to run for 4 first downs in the game like he did, but it's without him, there's clearly a drop off, and I don't know what the answer is. There's going to be a lot of people that say Thad Moss in the Super Bowl. Last I checked, he's still on injured reserve on the practice squad, but yeah, I really don't know.
They have to make a decision, I believe, unless there's different postseason rules. They have to make a decision on Auden Tate by Wednesday.
This week. Yeah,
February
yep.
2nd is the cutoff date. That would be 3 weeks from when they returned him to practice, designated him for return off the IR.
He traveled with the team too, so
yeah.
You would think he's getting close. So maybe that is the route they go.
It'll be interesting to see if they actually put him at tight end. They've done it.
It's one game.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of this. Like, people are like, oh, how are they going to block Aaron Donald? Or how? If you're Zac Taylor, you're Brian Callahan, it's one game. It's 60 minutes, and you can get creative and you can do what you need to do to squeak out a win. And that's obviously what Lou did, and what this team has done, multiple times this postseason.
That's what it comes down to, right? Is each of these postseason games is like, do
Right.
just enough. Maybe it's not pretty. Maybe it doesn't go the way that fans want it to go, but you're in the Super Bowl. And now you just need to do just enough. One
Whatever
more
it
game.
takes.
Yeah, that's exactly it. We're going to have a ton of Super Bowl coverage on the Locked On Bengals podcast. James and I will be in Los Angeles next week. Plenty of good stuff coming to you from LA.
We're
Got
trying
a
to
lot
negotiate
more.
with Joe. We'll see. We'll see if we can get him to sneak out there. I don't
That's
know.
right. That's right. So really looking forward to the Radio Row stuff we'll have for you next week, and more details to come there, of course. Still some time to reflect on the AFC Championship as well. Mike Bengal Sands will join us tomorrow for a film review. We're not going to jump straight into the Rams and those matchups quite yet, but we're going to shift gears and shift our focus shortly thereafter. So a little bit more basking in the afterglow of the AFC Championship before we turn our sights fully to Super Bowl 56, LVI in Roman numerals, I believe. So until next time, Bengals fans, that's what you have to look forward to on the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.